Hello and welcome to this webinar around migrating from Project Online to Power PPM. Just give it 1 more minute to allow everybody to join, and then we'll get started. All right, let's jump right into it. So this is a webinar around migrating from Project Online to Power PPM. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to use the chat, or we will open for the mic in the end of the webinar. So before just diving into this, obviously we have a lot of experience migrating from Project Online to Power PPM and other systems as well. And around a year ago, we set aside to actually build a package so we can reuse a lot of this knowledge. And this is some of the knowledge I'm going to share today together with an actual package that you can take and use to migrate your own Project Online solution. So first of all, before you ever set out to actually migrate, you might ask yourself why you want to migrate. And there's, of course, some recommendations here from Microsoft that Project Online is running out of support. And they are now publicly writing on the website, they encourage customers to migrate as soon as possible. And this is, of course, not a specific deadline, but it is something to consider that Project Online will not be there forever. If you work with Project Online, you obviously also know around the many limitations, for example, the 2,000 project site limitation or the 5,000 project limitations. This is, of course, a limitation we no longer have in the new Power PPM environment. And if you seem to overcome these or have problems cleaning up your projects, then this is, of course, also a good decision to migrate. Now, if you're familiar with workflows and are using SharePoint workflows in your current environment, you probably also experience that this is becoming less and less supported, and it's today very difficult to update or modify your workflows in SharePoint. Of course, moving into a platform like Power PPM, there's a lot of benefits. I'm not going to go through the entire PPM system, Power PPM system, but just highlight some of the briefs here. Of course, there's the roadmap overview, which is really, really cool, where you get an overview across both traditional and agile projects. You have the portfolio overview. We latest are about to release more advanced scenario planning, where you can create different scenarios based on your portfolios and your initiatives. And then, of course, there's native program support, where you can bind multiple projects into one program and get an overview of when they're going to be delivered. We got better agile support, and then, of course, a much more user-friendly timesheet application. In terms of the platform itself, I'm going to go a little bit more into details in a minute, but it's, of course, Power Apps, and this is a platform that's very easy to modify and support going forward. And it's also something that has built-in lifecycle management, something that we kind of missed from Project Online. And then it's easy to integrate. Now, before you set out to actually migrate from Project Online, it's a good thing to consider your current solution and how you want to use these entities going forward. And one of them is, of course, unused fields. It's a very classic thing that you create a lot of fields when moving into Project Online. Some of those fields might not be used today. And this is a good opportunity to go over which field contains data and which fields are actually being used. Reports is, of course, also something that you probably created a lot of different reports in Project Online. Not always those reports are being used. And if these reports are built in Power BI, that's actually a way to pull out statistics to see which reports are used and which are not, giving it the perfect opportunity to say maybe we only migrate half of them. If you've implemented VBA macros to provide the advanced business logic, this is a good time to consider how we want to migrate that logic. Obviously, you don't want to be bound into every project manager using the client going forward. So this is a good opportunity to go over those macros and see what they actually does. In terms of views, there's a lot of different views in Project Online, and you probably created a few yourself. One thing that you can do with Power PPM is that you can have the project managers create their own views, so only providing them with a subset of the views you have today and let them modify upon that. That can make the system a lot more simple. The security model in Project Online is both simple and complex, depending on how you use it. When you prepare for the migration, consider what kind of security model you will have going forward. And then, of course, utilize the features that you have in Power PPM, meaning that, of course, we have some macros that are going away, but we're getting a lot of new features that is fitting into an online first platform. For example, these business rules, where we can make rules that easily supply different subroutines. So if you have fields that only be displayed to certain project managers on certain situations, you can easily create a business rule around those fields. Workflows is where we implement all our logic. So saying that you have an agile project, we want a certain set of fields being set. This is where we implement that. Roll up and calculated fields. In Project Online, you had a very limited number of calculated fields before the system became slow. We no longer have these limitations. So consider how you want to use calculate fields to implement your logic and your business rules. And also be aware that we now have roll-up fields where we can basically roll up everything from the assignment task level up to the project program and portfolio level. And then also consider integrations. Integrating into the Power PPM system has never been easier. With Power Automate, we now have over 370 different connections to different applications. So it's simply just choosing the right connector and start importing or exporting data. And then, of course, dashboards can provide a very good overview in certain situations where you might be able to replace legacy Project Online features. Now, a typical migration plan and workshop could look like this. This is where we, of course, first of all, have a preparation workshop where we set aside what projects do we want to archive? Do we want to migrate everything? Which data do we want to include and which data do we want to exclude, such as custom fields, custom lists, custom data, documents, users, and resources. Then we set aside to actually configure Power PPM to your specific needs. And we start our migration workshops where we map everything out, saying that this field in Project Online is mapped to this field in Power PPM. This is also the step where we do some data cleaning on corrections on data that has maybe been a text value before. We want to migrate it into be a lookup value. Then we start a pilot migration, and if everything goes well in the UAT, we'll move it into production and start our communication towards the end users. And the last step is, of course, to support the end users. Now, a few single word around the Power PPM license. There's, of course, a few license parameters. The ones to notice here is, of course, these Power Apps per app license for the project managers. Before you need the P3 license for project managers, but in the new system, we only need a Power PPM installation and the Power Apps per app license. If you have team members who are time register, you also need time for teams. And if you have line managers, obviously you will still need Team Planner. So what is actually migrated with this package? Well, first of all, we have migrated all projects into initiatives. This, of course, means all project standard data, not custom fields that you created. You will configure them in the migration tool itself. And we also migrate tasks and resources. Now, one thing to notice is that we do recommend that you migrate all resources from Project Online into Power PPM in order for the assignments to map up correctly. Then, of course, dependencies and request and allocations are also migrated in the terms that we're moving the Cosmos database over to the new system. and time registrations are exported into an Excel file, which can be uploaded into Time for Teams for importing. So it's, of course, also important to consider what is not migrated by default. So with the package, we migrated everything I just showed before, but there's a few things we don't migrate that you have to configure manually. One of them is, of course, as I mentioned, resources, where you need to make sure that you have the same resources in the two systems for everything to be mapped up correctly. And then, of course, custom lists. It's very common in Project Online that you create custom lists both on the project side, but also on the root Project Online PVA side. And these custom lists, of course, have to be mapped out individually into entities in Power PPM and migrated. Of course, migrating them is not the difficult part, but mapping them out can be a challenge, especially if you have many lists out on different project sites that don't have the same structure. Of course, documents and project sites might also need to be migrated. We do recommend that you actually keep the old Project Online sites and transform them into a SharePoint site and just referencing the sites over there. Our typical learning is that many of these projects won't run for more than a year, so all the documents being stored on the SharePoint site is actually sufficient because all new sites will be created in Microsoft Teams. There's, of course, other stuff to be aware of, such as views and workflows and baselines. There's, of course, a few requirements and prerequisites for migrating from Project Online to Power PPM. The first is that Project Online needs to be in project permission mode, and custom fields on projects and tasks must be mapped manually. As I mentioned before, resources must exist in both systems for the migration to occur naturally. Now, in terms of how the tool is actually put together, it consists of three parts: one for Project Online, one for Teams to map out time registrations, and one for Team Planner to map out resource data. Now, Project Online to Power PPM Toolkit is the biggest part of this. And what to notice here is, of course, you get a package where you got a lot of Power Automate flows in here. And all you have to do is set out the Project Online URL, which will basically kick off the entire migration. Now, if you want to create your own logic doing this migration, let's say you have a list per project, then you will simply extend this child flow with the custom logic that you want in here. If you have different tasks that you don't want to have migrated, of course, you can also implement that logic in here. Now, migrating data from Time for Teams is actually very easy. You can easily export all the time registrations into a CSV file, an Excel file, and then you just upload that Excel file into Time for Teams, and it will take care of the rest. Team Planner in itself doesn't really need to be migrated because the data that exists on Project Online will have the same format and IDs as the data that will exist in Power PPM. So we'll simply just reconfigure Team Planner to support a new Project Online environment, a new Power PPM environment. So now I will jump into a demo where we can take a look at how we actually migrate data from a standalone Project Online environment. So here you see I got my classic Project Online environment. Not a lot of stuff has been configured in here. If you go into PDA settings and look at custom fields, you can see it's pretty out of the box what we have configured here. I've imported a few projects where you can see we got some start and end days, we got some duration, and of course an owner and an administrator, and some project IDs. In here we can of course see we got a description, a start date, finish date, and so on. And if I go into the schedule part here, we can see we got some schedules related to the projects in here. I can just zoom out just a little bit to see the entire plan. And we can see we have a milestone, and we of course also have some people assigned to this. And if I just go into the build team here, we can of course see who is located in this team. So going back here to the overview, the next thing I'm going to do is go into Power PPM solution. And what you want to do here is, of course, import this project online solution. And you simply do that by pulling this from our support side and importing it to your environment where Power PPM is installed. When that is imported, you will go in and modify the project online URL to match the URL on your project online site. That is basically it. If you want to set a custom field, you would go into, for example, create project here, edit the Power Automate flow, and just update the custom field that you want to be mapped to Power PPM. Simply go in here and choose benefits. So now we're ready to start the migration. And I simply do that by just going into the Start Project Online migration and clicking Run. You can see I had a few tests before this. And this will run for roughly 1.5 minutes to import 20 projects and their tasks and resources and assignments. While this is running, just going to take a minute more. I'm going to go over here to Power PPM, just refresh the views. And we can see now the projects are starting to be loaded into the system. We can, of course, see that general data like schedule progress, start and end date, and so on are pulled into the system. And I also chose that we didn't have a KPI summary in Project Online just to put them at green to start with. I can now go into accelerated growth here, and I can see that there's, of course, the owner is set correctly, the summary, the start and end date. And if I go into the timeline here, we can also see that the tasks are started to be migrated in. And if I just refresh the view, we should soon see all the tasks in here. I can also see that the assignments has been migrated in. So the people that were in Project Online, Alex here and Christy is now imported into the tool and assigned to the correct tasks. You can also see that milestones are migrated correctly and subtasks are migrated correctly. Now, a general note on this Project Online package is, of course, this is not meant as an end-to-end package to support all scenarios. It's meant as a getting started package that you can build on to support your custom scenario. There's always the need for individual tweaks and additions that you want to put into the package. And this is also why we provide it as an unmanaged package, so you can create it on your test environment and import it into your production environment when you're ready to migrate all of your data. The most part of the package is built upon Power Automate. And this is, of course, that Power Automate is a very strong tool for importing and exporting data. And we also see a lot of people who have good experience with using Power Automate. It should say that some knowledge around Power Automate is recommended before using this tool, as it makes everything easier to configure. As I said, Team Planner data is not moved as such. It is instead reconfigured to point to Power PPM instead of Project Online. Time registration data is exported into Excel and uploaded into the Time for Teams module. Other stuff to consider is, of course, after the migration. What do we do with Project Online? What do we do with project sites? There's many different opinions here, but our recommendation and what we see the most is that you actually keep the Project Online site in place, but you remove all licenses and permissions from the Project Online site so people don't accidentally access it. So, of course, where to start? Well, if you are a company that are considering moving into to Power PPM, it's always a good idea to prepare yourself by identifying what functions you would like to have moved and what is not needed anymore. Of course, reach out to a Projektum, or if you're using a local partner, reach out to that partner. And then we will together start to plan a workshop and set a go live date where I believe the migration can be completed.